Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us on the RTD Aging Well series webinar, Developing a Plan for Aging in Place and Holding Family Conversations. As part of RTD's Life Planning for Clients, planning for long-term care needs as clients age, we want to consider a wide range of options. When clients express an intention to age in place, we want to think about how they will receive support for their transitional needs from family and outside caregivers, and also the logistics of maintaining their lifestyle. So our presentation today will provide some guidance and considerations for making this choice to age in place and how we can make a successful outcome for long-term care happen for you and your family. Our presenters today are Jay Cherney. Jay has a Ph.D. in counseling psychology, and Jay facilitates meetings that result in greater cohesion and clarity for family intentions and responsibilities. And Bode Hennegan, who's owner of Life Managers and Associates. Her company provides personal assistance services to manage the details of life as clients age in place. So to start, we'll begin our presentation with Bode.
Thank you, Jeff. Before we get started, we wanted to take a poll of our attendees to find out whether you are a person who is planning to age in place yourself, or if you are a child of a parent, helping a parent to age in place. So if you could take a moment while we go through our introductions to answer that question, that would be very helpful for us.
Okay, it's not. Moving to the next slide.
I'm sorry, we're
A little technical difficulty. Maybe the poll is interfering with moving the slides. Oh, here we go. Okay. So just a quick introduction for me. I'm Jay Cherney. I'm a psychologist and a family facilitator. I'm also a father and a grandfather. This is a picture of my 2-year-old grandson, Judah. He's in the midst of having a heart-to-heart with Dr. Freud bobblehead, and he's had some interesting interactions with him, decapitates him frequently. So sometimes a bobblehead is just a bobblehead. Another part of my qualifications for this webinar is that I run Dad Lab, which is a fatherhood program at Abington Hospital, and I'm a mediator for the U.S. Post Office as well.
And I'm Bode Hennegan. My background is I have an MBA, and I worked in project management until 2001 when I had identical twin boys. And we were blessed to 2 years later have fraternal twin girls. And at that point, I had a unique opportunity to have full-time help in my own home. And it's not always easy to have help in your home. Eventually, the kids do go to school, and I start volunteering through my church. And I found myself in homes with people that were sick with illnesses, and found that the whole family was surrounded to help the medical needs of these individuals. And things around the house were starting to fall apart. Bills were being left unpaid, mail was piling up, the home was starting to go into disarray, and realized that there was a lack of support around these functions. And so I started my business, Life Managers and Associates, and we've worked with many families over the last 7 years, and we have seen many families respond successfully to aging in place, and we've seen other families where it's not been so successful. And one of the key factors for the families that have had success stories is that they have had some sort of plan in place and have had family discussions about the what ifs with regard to aging. And so that's why Jay and I teamed up to speak with you today about creating a plan for yourself for aging in place. And what is the goal? The goal is to gain security and freedom for deciding for yourself when and how to respond to changes. And for the children on the call that are here to support your parents, it's for you to find out so that what your parents' wishes are, because people want to be as independent as possible for as long as possible. So how is it that they would like to be able to respond to these changes? And as I said, we want to be as independent as possible for as long as possible. We cannot predict the future. We don't have crystal balls, but what we do know is as we age, our cognitive ability declines and our physical abilities decline. I know that I'm at 50 and I can't do nearly as much physically as I could do 20 years ago. And so what is that going to look like for me at 70, 90, 110? Another reason for creating a plan is that it does reduce stress and anxiety. By thinking about and talking about the what ifs, you're better able to respond in times of crisis. It's also an opportunity to strengthen family relationships. These conversations are extremely difficult, and we will talk about that later in the presentation, but it's also an opportunity for people to bond around these conversations. Protecting finances, really important. When we're in a time of crisis, our options may be limited. We're also clouded by emotion, and it makes decision-making more difficult. So we want to be able to create a plan so that we can ensure that we're coming up with the optimal solution for us. And most importantly, safety. We want to reduce safety risks for everyone. We want people to remain in their homes safely. So I'm going to tell you a story about the Smith family. It's a story that you might have heard before. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, they had been married for over 50 years. They're both in their early 90s, and Mrs. Smith suffers a stroke, and she becomes blind in one eye, and her mobility decreases, and he becomes her primary caregiver. And he does a beautiful job. He's doing the best he can taking care of her. But remember, he's 92, and he doesn't have the same energy that he had at one time. And so what happens? He begins to take on stress. He is exhausted physically, and he begins to make decisions because they've never had the conversation that she might not have intended. The bills pile up, the mail piles up, the house begins to go into disarray, things break and they don't fix it. Eventually, he has an accident because he's still driving, and now the son comes in, and the son begins to make decisions for both of them that neither one of them intended. So how could this have been different if they had had a conversation about this? Perhaps they could have brought a caregiver in to take care of Mrs. Smith so that Mr. Smith didn't get so worn down. Perhaps they could have brought somebody in to help with bill paying so that mistakes weren't made, that mail was, they stayed on top of the mail. Perhaps they could have brought someone in to help with home maintenance and repairs. So the question really is,
yeah, so families tend to not have these conversations. And why is that? So from a psychological point of view, I think it's pretty clear that facing decline and death is really an uncomfortable topic of conversation. So we have a short-term boost of feeling better when we procrastinate, when we put that question off. So very few families like to get together and say, hey, great, let's talk about decline and death. That'll be fun. So this is why it's a really tough conversation to have. But it's really pivotal to have it. The decline is inevitable. As little as we'd like to admit that to ourselves, we're all going to lose capacity over time. And we're thinking of this kind of planning conversation as really an extension of planning that you already do. Everybody buys insurance. That's a plan for a later difficult eventuality. Most people do plan for retirement, to change, when they are getting ready to change their lives. They have to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? What kind of new life structure do I want to build? So this kind of planning for decline and aging in place is really a piece of the larger question of financial and life planning that you're already doing if you're clients of RTD.
So when to begin? I would say now. It's never too soon to begin. And as we go through this presentation, you'll realize that this isn't a one and done conversation. It takes a lot of time and energy to put this all together. So the sooner the better with where to begin. So I want to talk about an analogy between a carpenter and a gardener. You need a plan, both carpentry and gardening, you need a plan to create a product. But the difference is with carpentry, you follow the plan and you come out with the same product every time if you followed the plan correctly. That doesn't happen with gardening because you have the environment. You still need a plan though. You need to know when to plant. You need to know how far apart to plant your seeds. You need to know how to respond to the environment. And the environment is much like life. You need to know the what ifs. What if there's too much water, not enough water? What if there's bugs? What if there's mold? What if there's rabbits? And this, so much like life and this plan, we're encouraging you to put a plan together to understand the what ifs. And the environment is going to constantly be changing. And the better your plan is, the better you are going to be able to respond to that environment.
Yeah, just the only thing I want to add to that is, it's about controlability. In gardening, you don't have total control. You have to manage the environment. And in life too, there's so much that's unpredictable, uncontrollable, comes by surprise. But having a plan in place can help you meet those challenges more effectively.
So we're going to talk today about a 5-step plan for aging in place. And the 5 steps are: organize your paper, take a look at your home, evaluate your home, create a plan for how you're going to live, and then we're going to bring in how to communicate that to your family and loved ones and make decisions about these things. And lastly, to document them. So let's take a look at organizing your papers. The goal here is to have all of your personal information and documents organized into a central location. The exercise of creating this personal inventory is what I'm going to call it, is an opportunity for you to assess where there's gaps. It's also an opportunity for you to reconnect with your professionals and to go over where things stand. The end product is a gift to your loved ones, to your spouse, to your children, to your power of attorney, so that they have one central location to find information in the time of crisis. So the first thing that's included in this inventory is emergency contacts. The second piece is your medical information. As we age, we tend to accumulate different specialists, and knowing who they are and how to get in contact with them is really important. Medication lists are oftentimes older adults are on many medications, and having a current medication list is very important. I would also encourage people to keep a copy of that medication list in their wallets. On the financial side, where are all your bank accounts? I have seen clients that have bank accounts all over the place, and it becomes very confusing. So this may be an opportunity to consolidate, and I would consult with your RTD professional about their advice here. Who are your professionals? Who are your financial professionals? Who is your accountant? And how do your children get in touch with these people? On the legal side, oftentimes people only think of the legal piece when they think about organizing their papers. But take a look. When was your will last updated, and where is that? Who do you have listed as your power of attorney? Is this the same person that makes sense for today? Advanced directives are put together by your attorney. One thing that I always encourage people that are aging in place to include, in addition to their advanced directive, is a POST form. And POST in Pennsylvania, it's the Pennsylvania Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And this form is copied on bright pink paper, and the first responders are trained to look for this on the refrigerator. In the time of crisis, you're generally not going to your file cabinet pulling out your advanced directives. It's great to have this information handy in the time of crisis. In other states, I would check with your Department of Health for the applicable form for your state. On the protection side, taking a look at your insurance policies, we have so often at Life Managers seen clients, especially with umbrella policies, paying for things that they had sold years ago. So take a look at those policies and make sure that they accurately reflect the items that you own. We've also seen instances where people have been underinsured. So, you know, this is a great opportunity for you to meet with your insurance agent and make sure that things are as they should be. The other thing to think about is if you have long-term care insurance. This is a very powerful tool. However, by the time you're ready to use that insurance, you are not going to be capable of submitting the claim. So someone else needs to know about the policy, needs to know what the terms of the policy are, so that at the point when you're ready to use the policy, they can help you with submitting that claim. And lastly, passwords, especially if you have digital assets. These passwords need to be located somewhere, and someone needs to know how to access them. So once you have your papers organized, the next thing to think about is your house itself. And there's a difference between wanting to stay in your home and being able to stay in your home. So the goal here would be to determine what is needed so that you can safely age in place. Things that people often think about are stairs, how to get to a bathroom. Is there a first floor bathroom? Is there a first floor full bathroom? Within the house, how are you going to get into the house if there's a number of steps to get in? Are there alternative entrance ways? But finding solutions to these things take both time and money. So being able to plan for how you're going to get up and down the stairs before you break your hip will allow you to come home and not have to go to rehab. If it were a longer term incapacitation, it's figuring all of these details. It's not the right time. You're in crisis mode at that point. And then oftentimes people end up in a facility. So if it's truly your goal to remain in the house, it's really important to look at at the whole house and understand what it's going to look like if you were no longer mobile. Clutter is one thing, or just organization within the house, that people often overlook. And a story that I often tell is I had a client who a number of years ago, it was a beautiful March day, and she wanted to sit out on her porch and enjoy the sunshine. But the cushions for her furniture were in the basement. So she went to the basement and grabbed these large cushions and started up the stairs. And unfortunately, she took a tumble. Fortunately, she was not extremely hurt, but it was a wake-up call to her that she can't keep those cushions in that closet anymore. So what happens then? The two of us opened up her hall closet because she identified that that would be a convenient place to store these cushions. But what's in there? There's games, there's linens from when she entertained, there's coats, some of which she was still wearing, some of which hadn't been worn in years. There were all sorts of knickknacks in there. So we had to pull everything out from that closet, start it with the cushions, and then put back in the things that she needed. And then we needed to find out what we could give away from the contents of the closet and what needed to be stored somewhere else in the house. And this really becomes a snowball effect, because as our mobility changes, we may not be able to get on a ladder to reach that top shelf in the kitchen, or get down on our knees to pull the heavy frying pan out of the bottom cabinet. So things within the house need to shift in order to be able to access the items that we use. And again, this can be a very, this isn't just a one-time project. This could take several going at it, it's the wrong word, but several attempts at looking at different areas of the house in order to be able to create a space that makes sense for your lifestyle. So plan for living. What I'd like to do is just take a minute to look at this as a flow chart. We've looked at step 1, which is to organize your paper. In step 2, when you've evaluated your home, if you come to an impasse on any area, for example, it's too expensive to put in a first floor bathroom, a stair glide is not going to fit in your stairs because it wraps around, and you can't afford an elevator. So, there's an impasse. So at that point, you need to think about alternative living arrangements. But we're going to assume for our example here and moving forward that you've examined your home and you've made whatever modifications are necessary for you to be able to safely live there. The difference between living in your home and living in a facility is when you're in a facility, there's trained professionals there that have eyes on you to help you transition as your ability decreases. And when you're in the home, you don't have that. Just as a statistic, women on average need 3.7 years of long-term care. So that's people helping them with long-term care needs, whether it's a family member, an aide, and men is 2.2. So if you're going to stay in your home, you have to have a plan for how you're going to handle life when you need those services. So what we advise is to look at all of the different core areas of your life and to begin to think about the what ifs in all of these areas. And so here's an example of the areas that we have identified. That doesn't mean that it's all inclusive. It would include driving, finances, medical, activities of daily living, that's dressing, bathing, eating, whether you need help with that. How are you going to handle home maintenance? Socialization, if you stop driving, how are you going to continue to see your friends and family? Have you talked about advance directives? What happens with the loss of a spouse, or if there's a life-changing event of a caregiver? For example, you were relying on your daughter and now she has 3 children and is unable to provide the same support that you had anticipated. So for each area, and we're going to just run through an example of driving. The first step to this would be to identify what your trigger point is. And a trigger point is an event that happens that you say, okay, now it's time. It's the oh no moment. And there's no wrong or right answers to what your trigger point is. It's what you're comfortable with. And for the example of driving and being involved in an at-fault accident, you may say, I'm going to continue to drive until this happens. You may say, you know what, I don't want to risk hurting another individual or hurting myself. I would like my trigger point to be determined before then. So an example of that is agreeing to take a annual driving exam. Being able to put some sort of quantitative measure around your trigger point is really important. Are you going to go to an outside agency to do that exam, or are you going to have your son or daughter be the person to make that determination? Once you have thought about at what point you are going to give up responsibility for an item, it's time to identify what are the options for how you're going to handle that. So if you're not driving, how are you going to get around? Some examples would be to use Uber, perhaps use a rideshare organization, or perhaps you're going to rely on a family member. But there are costs and implications to each. For Uber, you may not be comfortable using a cell phone. You can use Uber without a cell phone, but again, that's a whole nother step. You may not be comfortable getting into a car that is not marked taxi. You may not have the funds in order to be able to Uber everywhere that you would like to go. With ride shares, you may be restricted to their schedule. There is no free in family. There is a cost to family providing caregiving. There's a cost of lost work. There's a cost of what that does to the relationship. It can be both positive and negative, but that should be recognized when family is being considered to do anything. What is the impact to that other person, both financially, and what kind of stress are you putting on that person, and really what is their availability. So I put together this worksheet for you. I just want to say that I recognize that we've taken the emotion out of this piece right here, and that's intentional. This is a tool for you to begin thinking about the options for you and to organize your thoughts so that you can then walk into the conversation. And the bottom row is intentionally left blank because once the conversation starts, there may be ideas that you hadn't thought of. So just real quick, another example would be with finances. And trigger points for that could be that you're unable to balance your checkbook. I have seen people spend 2 hours trying to balance their checkbook when it used to take them 10 minutes. Perhaps it's when you become victim to a scam, or perhaps it's that you can't identify money or create change. or that you're overlooking important information on your financial documents. So what are options if you need help with your finances? You could engage a bill paying service. You could put all of your bills on auto pay, or perhaps you could have a family member doing it. 3 examples, there are hundreds of options. It's really up to you to think about what the different options are. Evaluate the cost and implications. For bill paying, you have to pay someone to do that, and are they a trustworthy service? When things are on auto pay, a lot of my clients don't like that. They're between 80 and 100, and they don't feel comfortable with automatic payments because they don't know how to access the information. The other problem with auto pay is unless you're reading the bills, you're not seeing if an item, if you have a reoccurring charge on your credit card, or if the alternative energy that you signed up with your electric company, that contract went up and all of a sudden the bill is $40 more, or the free HBO is now you have to pay for. So all of those things, if on auto pay, unless somebody's looking at the bills, you could be paying more than you realize. And then again, with family members, not everyone wants their children in there knowing what their financial situation is. And there may or may not have the availability in order to help out.
Okay, so we've given you kind of an overview of the points you have to pay attention to and the aspects of planning. What I want to dive into now is to give an overview of the family communication aspects of this process. How you communicate, how you process these questions together as a family and come to decisions about these important questions. So I want to start off with this video that beautifully describes the difference between problem solving and empathy. And those are 2 skills that come into play when people try to make these decisions. So check this out and see what you think. No sound.
Feel it in my head, and it's relentless, and I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just
Don't.
try to take things my way, well, I have to keep.
Okay. So I've shown this video to many people, many groups, and almost everybody relates to it and gets it and has been there on one side or the other of this problem solving versus empathy dilemma. So when there's a problem to be solved, some people dive right into, okay, let's look at the options, let's fix it. Other people, it's a style, it's a temperament, need to have their emotions be expressed, have their emotions be heard, and only then are they open and able to engage in thinking through some solutions. So that's just something to think about as you approach this within the family, that this kind of dichotomy might show up. So here's a little bit of an overview of what listening with empathy is really about. Empathy is the capacity to step outside of your skin and into the emotions and the experience of the other person, and try to get that as much as possible. And the way I do that and help people do that is to have you listen for their story, for the lens through which they're looking at the world, how they see the world, how they see themselves. And when you hear a proposal, an idea, a solution, you might think, well, that's bad. That's not going to work. But what's more useful than simply pushing back that idea is to ask the other person to try to understand what's behind that idea. How did they come to that solution? Because in that process, through questioning their decision-making process, you get to understand better how they view things and what they're trying to accomplish. So you're asking questions like, what does this solution mean to you? Why is it important? What does it do for you? So we want to apply that dynamic, that question of problem solving versus empathy with one of the most challenging kinds of conversations in this planning, in my view, and that's the driving question. Because driving not only is so much is in practical terms is built on being able to get around, but driving represents independence for many people. And that first when you're a teenager and you first start to drive, that's fantastic sense of freedom, and to lose that freedom can be really powerful and devastating.
So we want to talk here about just an example, because it's one thing if you're the parent telling your children, here's my plan for when I'm going to stop driving. But what does it look like when the child has to ask the parent? The child doesn't necessarily think the parent should still be driving. And what we're suggesting is that the decision goes back to the parent. So an example here is of a 50-year-old person asking a 70-year-old person or 80-year-old person, at what point do you plan to stop driving? Because that then gives the ownership to that to the parents, for them to decide for themselves when it is that they're going to stop driving. And when I did this with my own father, it's not an easy conversation. His response was, well, that's easy when I start making mistakes. And so my question to him was, well, how are you going to know when you make mistakes? And immediately I saw the wall go up and realized that the conversation wasn't going to be resolved all at one time. And so, oftentimes with these types of things, you need to go back several times, let the emotions diffuse, and then go back and say, okay, so you said you're going to stop driving when you make mistakes. Is that when you get in an accident? Or is it, how can we define that? And again, with my own father, the wall went up. I got 3 steps in and the wall went up, and then I had to stop again.
Yeah. Defensiveness is, in this kind of conversation, is almost guaranteed. I mean, I'm just thinking now, imagining my 30-year-old daughter coming to me and saying, well, Dad, when are you going to stop driving? That would not be easy, because it touches on such an important emotional question. And sometimes it gets to an adult child might come and say, well, I'm just going to take the car keys away. They might come and try to impose a solution, as if in that video the guy just grabbed the nail and yanked it out on his own. And of course, that's a last resort and can have some really bad consequences. Okay, so what we're proposing here is that these decisions are made within the family itself. So what we're leading towards is having everybody convene and have family conversations to help devise a plan that fits everybody best. And the thing is that the adult children are often involved in executing that plan. So they need to be part of the process of designing the plan. So here are some of the points of challenge, why these family conversations for planning are so challenging. There's going to be different ideas about what is the right way to go. And there's so many different kinds of relationships within every family, and there are tensions embedded in every family, no exceptions. And these kinds of conversations can easily stir up those old competitions, old jealousies, and can quickly turn a calm, rational conversation into a major blow-up, a chaotic, divisive battle. The goal, of course, is to create a plan that has fairness and equality in caregiving among the children, and that's not easy to design. Another big question, another big reason why this conversation is so sensitive is that it involves a big shift. It involves adult children beginning to shift roles and parent your parent. And when we're so embedded in being children to our parents that when we see our parents decline and we start to begin to parent them, it's odd, it's strange, it's uncomfortable on both sides and in some different ways. So here's a photo that takes a humorous look at that role reversal, and trying to lighten it up with humor, if that's possible, at the right moment, is a great idea if you can do that. So the other main point here is that awareness of that dynamic shift in relationship, that role shift, is the key to being able to manage it better. If you can start to talk about, gee, this is weird because I'm now sort of acting as your parent when you're my parent. If that can be put on the table and be understood by everybody, that smooths the path a little bit. That makes it a little bit easier to have the conversation from those new roles. So who leads this planning conversation and these planning family meetings? Ideally, it's best if the parent initiates it and is the leader, because it's it's mostly about their lives and the changes in their lives. But sometimes it can be, we're suggesting that you do this well in advance of decline, so that the parents are still competent, are still capable of being fully engaged in this planning process. But sometimes it's the siblings, it's the kids, the adult kids, that will take the initiative and start this process. So here's a checklist of just some of the important points of beginning to organize a family meeting and get the process going. There needs to be a facilitator, whether it's one of the adult children or the parents. Ideally the parent. But somebody needs to convene, organize, and guide the conversation. That facilitator needs to gather as much information in advance as possible, the personal inventory, financial documents, etc. And the facilitator may want to meet with others in the family before a group meeting to outline the topics, to sort of get the process going. And it's a good idea to distribute an agenda in advance and get input before the face-to-face meeting. Of course, it's ideal to include as many members as possible, and when that's not possible geographically, to include people far away by phone or Skype. So here's just some guidelines for the actual process of this conversation. I mean, this is, of course, a big picture overview. There's so much that goes into running a family meeting and having a family meeting. One person speaks at a time. Everybody needs to be heard from. Have a note taker. Have someone list the options on a whiteboard, and so that things are clarified and stay organized. If that moment crops up where there's a big impasse, where there's a strong set of emotions, the facilitator needs to notice that and probably call a timeout to let things cool off. There's very unlikely that you'll be able to decide all these questions in one meeting. The first meeting is probably a way to begin to define the questions that need to be considered and have them be thought through individually before the next meeting. And in terms of these family tough dynamics, the old competitions, old jealousies that come up, the facilitator and everybody needs to try to understand that you're not there to resolve those old divisions. You're there to try to actually accept those differences, set them aside as much as possible in the service of coming to the common goal of devising the best plan to care for the parents. What triggers some of those outbreaks is feeling criticized, is feeling like your idea has been shut down, and that causes defensiveness. So again, the skill of empathy is important. If you hear an idea that doesn't make sense to you, assume that there's a positive intention underneath it, and try to inquire what's behind this. Why do you think this is the best solution? And I think it's helpful to remember that every idea has pros and cons, upsides and downsides. And in this conversation, if there's a sense of openness and people are sharing different ideas, somewhat naturally, there may be opportunities for compromise, for bringing together hybrid ideas and coming together with two different solutions that end up being shared and end up being a new idea. In terms of assigning caretaker roles, it naturally makes sense to assign tasks based on strengths and experience. So there needs to be an assessment of who has not only the skills, but the time to fill these different roles. Who knows about financial matters? Who's good with their hands and fixing things? Who's good in direct caretaking? Who might be good to do the liaison work with doctors? Okay, so that's just a big picture view of some of the stumbling blocks and the process of initiating a family conversation that will help a parent age in place most effectively.
And regardless of what your decisions are, we just encourage everyone to document, whether it's minutes that were taken at the meeting, or a summary review, or part of your personal inventory, what your decisions are and your plan is. And this information should be reviewed. We suggest annually, but at least on some periodic intervals, so that everyone's kept in the loop on what the decisions were and how you're going to move forward.
Okay, so what we're hoping is that this overview has been useful for you, has triggered some ideas, made you more aware of the importance of starting to think about these plans in advance as much as possible. And what we're suggesting is that you take those ideas and bring them to your RTD advisor and begin with that advisor to think in more practical terms about exactly how you want to engage in this process.
So we're welcome to take any questions.
Thank you, Jay and Bode. We really appreciate that. For those that are listening, you can submit your questions through the questions dialog box that would be to the right of your screen. In the control screen, it says questions there, and you can click on that, and you can type in a question that will go to us. And while we're waiting, I guess, Bode, what suggestions do you have for a couple that are in their house, but even though it might be unrealistic for them to remain, are there other professionals that might come in and assess, besides yourself, that might, be more convincing of the need to consider another option? What do you do when you find that someone is really anchored to staying where they are, and yet they might need some significant, challenges to have them remain?
Well, a physical therapist or occupational therapist would be qualified to come in to make do a safety evaluation, and given whatever an individual's physical limitations are, would recommend the placement of things like grab bars and other apparatus to help mobility. Geriatric case managers do work with families to do placements to facilities. It's such a tough call.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, that goes back to why it is that we're encouraging people to have these conversations as early as possible. Because someone who's 90, I often wonder if that person, when they were 70, would have made the same decisions for themselves. So safety is certainly the biggest piece of this. We don't want people falling and being unsafe in their homes.
Right.
So,
thank you.
This is where you perceive that a couple can't make it in their current condition, and you're trying to sort of alert them to that. Is that the scenario you're talking about?
Yes, sometimes it's hard for individuals just to recognize that. Yeah. Are they feel like they're being pressured or whatnot? But yes, we're looking for sort of some outside counsel that would provide more support for the idea that maybe this isn't the best idea for them.
Yeah, and I think at that point, if the family is there for you to bring in the next generation to have input, they may have more leverage, they may have less leverage, but bringing in other family members to alert them to get into that conversation and make them aware of your concern.
Yeah. Jay, what issues seem to be hot buttons for adult children in terms of them sort of getting together and agreeing on how things should be handled? Is it a care issue by outsiders, or the health of the caregiving spouse, or the finances? Where do you find to be the hot buttons?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much depends on the state of the relationship between the kids and the parents. How conflicted or how easy has it been? Some adult children love to care for parents, love to give back and take care because they were cared for well as kids. Other adult children may have resentments and not be so open to getting involved in this, and that's that varies a lot. So I think that the trigger points are really very personal and very emotional and unique to each family.
Right. Okay. And as planners, it sounds like the earlier we we talk about this subject and do some discovery on it, it would make the most sense, particularly if this is just one option. There's plenty of time to consider others. As Bode, I think, had said, starting earlier is probably best. Terrific. Rachel, do we have any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions come through, but if anyone does, we will certainly provide Bode and Jade's contact information for follow-up questions.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all.
All right.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we will have an audio file available for viewing and listening to again. And we thank you for your time and enjoy this beautiful day.